following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Every day, citizens around the country are faced with new dilemmas. Dilemmas that affect them profoundly. Whether it's injustice, discrimination, falling through the cracks, scandals and cronyism, balances of power, ethics, religious freedoms, state versus citizens, and unfunded mandates, and the list goes on and on and on. Welcome to Speak Up. It's directed at those who have fallen through the cracks, and it gives them a voice. It's your turn to speak up, to stand up and fight back. Welcome to a special edition of Speak Up. I'm Kevin Avard, your host. Today we're going to be talking about a subject that is off the track from family court. We're going to be talking about a topic that has affected people across the state, and that topic is FRM. And I have some special guests here. I have Al and Susan McElveen, and of course Peter Martino.
Right.
And I want to welcome you all to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
So I've heard of FRM. I don't know much about it. I was talking to Representative Ken Gidge, and I was kind of nodding my head, as he's saying, well, what about FRM and all the complexities with that? And I didn't want to appear as ignorant as I was. But I've seen how it's affected people across the state. I went to a bank here, local here in Nashua, and one of the tellers was telling me how the FRM affected her. She had to go back to work because she lost her pension. She lost her job, and there were other things that were going on, and she was trying to educate me beyond on the other side of the teller. And I still have this kind of blank look because I really don't have a good grasp of what FRM is and how it's affected the people of New Hampshire. And so here you are today, and if you could maybe take us
Sure.
some baby steps in the beginning, and then we'll see if we can run from here.
Let me try it first, if I may. Financial Resource Mortgage was a company that had been licensed by the New Hampshire Banking Department for 20 years. They resided in Meredith, New Hampshire, and they were a broker, just like a real estate broker. They brought a buyer and a seller together, and they brokered it. They got paid a commission. That's how they existed. In November of 2009, Financial Resource Mortgage, FRM, closed their doors unexpectedly. And within one day of closing, the then Commissioner of Banking, Peter Hildreth, came up to Meredith and got on TV and said this was a Ponzi scheme. And this was all about securities. It had, I licensed them, but they were really selling securities.
Peter Hildreth, he was the
then banking commissioner for the banking in New Hampshire Banking Commission. Peter Hildreth knew, because he had been the banking commissioner since 2001, that his own auditors had identified 70 violations of state and federal law over the past 7 audits. He knew that. Yet he did nothing about it. He had never fined them. He had never done anything, never taken the license away. Nothing ever happened. So now when this thing went down, the first thing he said was, oh my goodness, they're going to come after me, to himself. And the first thing I have to do to survive is I have to find a way to get out of this this situation I'm in. So what did he do? He said they were selling securities, because at one time FRM did sell securities, but they had not done it since 2005, and he knew that. Mm-hmm. But he said that publicly, and he started to spread the blame. So the Attorney General of New Hampshire listened to what Peter had to say, and by their own admission, as recently as a week ago, the Attorney General's office said they accepted what Peter Hildreth said, that they were securities, and they wrote that into their Attorney General's report, which the Governor's Council had requested the Attorney General to do. And lo and behold, then of course the Governor blessed the Attorney General's report, and we suddenly have a situation in which misinformation is becoming biblical.
May I interrupt you for?
Sure.
So we have the banking commissioner?
Yes.
Peter Hildreth?
Yes.
Who was the attorney general at the time?
Michael Delaney.
Michael Delaney?
Right.
And the governor at the time?
John Lynch.
John Lynch, okay. And do you think the attorney general's office was more privy to what's going on, or
I truly don't believe that the Attorney General's office knew what Peter Hildreth, whether he was stating things factually or not, but I think it was easier for them to accept that because the Bureau of Securities Regulation, was absolutely contradicting what Peter Hildreth said. Those two divisions had been having an adversarial relationship for a while. So this was kind of a war game going on between the two of them, okay? The only problem is the Bureau of Securities Regulation was the one that was clean, and Peter was trying to make them dirty or show that they were guilty. And the Attorney General said, well, wait a minute. I have someone in my group called the Director of Consumer Protection, and we haven't got our hands totally clean either because 6 complaints came in of which they were criminal in nature, and what did we do with them? Oh, we gave them to banking. What do you mean we gave them to banking? Criminal complaints never leave the AG's office, right? But they did. No one knows why that happened except that was wrong. So what we have is a sharing of the blame. And oh, by the way, 11 days after FRM closed their doors, the Attorney General puts FRM into involuntary bankruptcy, Chapter 7, which means a federal trustee will be appointed and they will immediately start to liquidate the estate.
is that different from receivership?
Yes, much different. Now, just a year before FRM, there was a company called Noble Trust, which went through a similar type of situation, but rather than put them into Chapter 7, they put them into receivership. The difference between the two is that they didn't have a federal trustee. They had the banking commission actually managing the closure of Noble Trust. Because we had a federal bankruptcy trustee who is a for-profit business,
Right.
he took a strategy supported by Peter Hildreth beginning to talk about these are securities. Securities means that if FRM really was in selling securities, then the bankruptcy trustee could go after all of the assets of the lenders, meaning all of their mortgages. He would drag them back into the estate, and he would literally have all this money coming in, which wasn't his rightfully, but it was his strategy, and until he was proven wrong, he keeps going. And so far, that bankruptcy trustee has extracted $5 million of money from the lenders, of which he has kept $3 million for himself. Now, that all happened because the Attorney General rushed within 11 days to do this. When asked why he did it, what his justification was, he said, well, at the time, Peter Hildreth said they were securities. And that was the strategy the bankruptcy trustee went with.
Well, what did the Securities Department do about this when they heard about this?
They said the information that these were securities was incorrect, and Mark Conley, a very, very noble gentleman, said, I am going to subpoena your records because this isn't... I'm sorry?
Said to banking.
Said to banking, I'm going to subpoena your records unless you release the information showing what really happened.
Right.
So Peter Hildreth had to release the information, and when he did, everyone saw that banking's hands were so completely... I mean, they had 70 violations of state and federal law. They never even fined them or shut them down. Never did anything. One person tried to start what they call a show cause order, meaning how do we take their license away? But both of those show cause orders literally disappeared, and no one knows how they disappeared. No one knows. Interestingly enough, Mr. Hildreth had 2 brothers that were lenders. Actually, they were investors at the time because they were selling stock when his brothers got involved, and he knew that. Mm-hmm. Now, did he do anything? I can't prove that he did anything because his brothers were there, but he supposedly recused himself, except he never did. So, does that help you a little bit?
So far, it does. Yes, and now, so we've got the baby steps of what's going on, and we have potentially fraud on Mr. Hildreth's?
No one will ever know No one will ever know
Potential fraud was my,
Well, let me say to you that what the state did is John Lynch had to do something, because quite frankly, this was in the newspapers all over the state, all over the
Right.
radio, television, blah, blah, blah. He had to do something, so he said, I'm going to ask for a removal hearing on Peter Hildreth. And Peter Hildreth said, oh, good, let's go. So they spent, how long getting ready? A year?
6 months, he
6
was on
months?
paid administrative leave.
Right. Go ahead.
oh, I was just going to ask Susan a question. You've been involved with this quite a bit, like with
Yes.
your husband.
Right.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit of how you got involved, or how you both got involved with FRM, or with this whole?
Well, with FRM, we received a postcard in the mail from FRM asking us if we were interested in funding private mortgages. And we had done it for 25 years, so yes, of course we were interested. And we drove up to Meredith and we sat with Scott Farah, the mortgage broker. We sat with Don Dodge, the mortgage servicer, CL&M. We sat with the two lawyers that were on the basement floor, Mike Gould and Mike Burke. They handled all of the mortgage closings, filed the mortgage documents in the county courthouses, because a mortgage is your collateral
Right.
for your loan that you're making to the borrower. And after about 3 hours of interviewing all of the parties, we were satisfied that they had to have been doing something right. After all, they were licensed by banking. They had been in business for 20 years. They must be doing something right. Al had just retired. We didn't want to necessarily do the servicing ourselves. They were offering the servicing to be done on the mortgage, and we thought we would take advantage of that. We came home, we got on the computer, we searched the computer for, any information we could find on FRM or Scott Farah. We found nothing negative. We had seen the banking license. He told us and showed us that he had a CPA auditing his books. We checked with the Better Business Bureau. It was an A+ rating. We checked with the Secretary of State's office. Everything was fine. We couldn't find any negative information. So we said we'd start slowly. And this was 2008. And it took about 6 months before we actually funded our first loan.
Okay.
That went smoothly. The checks, the monthly interest checks came in. It went from the borrower to the servicer and then to us. Everything was fine. So then we did another one and another one and another one. And it was 2009, August, and there were three mortgages that we were interested in funding, so we forwarded the cash. We were becoming quite concerned, calling all of the time to Scott Farah, saying, when are these three mortgages going to close? It's taking too long, what's wrong? And he was then telling us it was the borrower who had not supplied all of the necessary paperwork. And we said, okay, that sounds reasonable, we'll give it another week or so. Well, the week that he did close, we were ready to drive up there to get our money back because something wasn't right.
Right.
Anyway, we found out on November 12th that FRM had closed its own doors. They just walked away from the business. And that was a call from another lender. So the next morning we got on the phone and we immediately called banking. We wanted to go into the banking department to discuss what was going on. The banking told us, no, it's not a banking issue. You must go see the Securities Bureau. It's a securities issue. Okay.
Big red flag right there.
Well, we thought so, but we got in the car. Remember, we're extremely upset now. We had just lost our life savings, and we had no sleep at all that night. And we got in the car and we drove to Concord. We went to Securities, and they made room for us. They were very busy. They had appointments the whole day, but they squeezed us in. We gave them a copy of all of our mortgage documents, spent an hour with one of the lawyers, and questioned him quite a bit about why isn't banking willing to see us, and he couldn't answer. We left Securities, had lunch. We said, we're here in Concord, we're an hour and a half away. We're here in Concord, we might as well go to the banking department and see if we can talk to somebody. The reception that we got at banking was just terrible. We asked the receptionist to see somebody. We explained we were FRM lenders. She immediately said, well, you have to go to securities.
Oh my gosh. It's not funny, it's,
It's sad.
Yeah.
You explained, we've just been to securities, now we want to see somebody here at banking. Well, you can't, we can't help you. We're only here for the borrowers, she said to us. Well, became insistent. She left, she came back, she said, no, we can't do anything for you. I said, look, we're here. We just lost our life savings. We're an hour and a half away. We demand to see somebody. So finally, they sent a lawyer out to talk with us. And we went through our story, and we said, you know, one of our mortgages was this lady from Washington, New Hampshire, and they got all excited. They knew the mortgage. They were fully aware of that mortgage. So then they wanted more and more and more information, and finally they took copies of everything we had, and we said, okay, now how are you going to help us with this? We can't help you. She said, watch my eyes closely, very sternly too, like she was talking to a 3-year-old child. Whatever information we have will be made public on our website.
okay, let me just stop you right there. Were you getting the idea that somebody told her to say this?
Yes. Yes, they clearly did not want to talk to us at all. They clearly did not want to divulge any information they had, and they wanted to wash their hands of us.
Do you know who was telling you this? Did the person's name, that was the clerk or whoever it was?
Well, by this time, it was a lawyer in banking.
What was her name or his name?
Mary Ann DeFosses, I believe.
And she was saying, look at me in my eyes? Or?
Yes, yes. Watch my eyes carefully, talking to me like I was a 3-year-old.
That's interesting.
Yep.
So you're going there to from the government, we're here to help you, and
Right.
look into my eyes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Clearly,
So-
they were trying to protect their boss, okay, who had said these were securities, so they weren't about to go anywhere besides where he wanted them to go.
Did they give you anything in writing at that point that was indicating that these are? All right, we do have another guest here, and I don't want Al to be, we'll get back
Sure,
to this
Pete.
point. Al, you're involved with this to some degree as well. Obviously, you wouldn't be sitting here.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about how you got introduced to FRM. And
I was actually introduced to them by a financial advisor. And similar with Al and Sue, I did a couple of loans, and as the lender, we had borrowers. And the way the structure was set up, just to clarify a little bit, is that FRM was simply a mortgage broker. They just matched up borrowers and lenders, and they
Okay.
got, I believe, a 4% fee for doing that part of it as the brokerage company.
there was supposedly some great return on this, I would assume.
Well, it was just the interest rate, whatever the loan was. These were secondary market loans. They were
Right.
hard money loans, people who often didn't have good enough credit to get conventional financing. So in that market, there is a little bit of a premium on the interest rate
Right.
just because of the risk involved for the lender. And so there was nothing uncommon or unusual about the loans that were brokered through FRM compared to any other mortgage brokerage firm in the country. CL&M was the company that serviced those loans. So what would happen is the lenders would send the money to CL&M, they would forward it on to the borrowers. Some of these were construction loans, and so CL&M would pay out the money as certain milestones were met in those loans. And also in some of the loans, an interest reserve was held back so that the payments would come directly from CL&M because the interest was held back on the loan. And so they had an escrow account in CL&M. And all of those monies were sitting in that escrow account. And what really happened here was outright fraud and theft. Don Dodge, who was the president of CL&M, issued a line of credit to Scott Farah, who was the president of FRM, for $20 million. Now, this wasn't Don Dodge's money to lend, nor was it Scott Farah's to receive. So
Right.
that was the real crime, was that $20 million line of credit being siphoned out of that escrow account. And eventually, when money coming in from new loans, like Al and Sue were funding new loans, but they hadn't closed yet, the money wasn't there anymore. That money was being used to pay off interest payments for other loans. But the interesting thing that I thought about what happened with the banking department, I tend to be a little bit more skeptical, a little bit more harsh on folks, but people call us investors, and it's a very precise term with regard to this situation. We were lenders.
Right.
There were investors in FRM. These were stockholders, and over a decade ago, when FRM was insolvent, people held millions of dollars worth of worthless stock. And so Peter Hildreth's two brothers were investors in FRM. Now, it would seem a little bit strange
Like a little bit of a conflict, you
that,
think?
that there would be this long period where FRM was allowed to stay in business long enough for all these loans and all this money to come in so that all of those investors got their money back. There's a lot of different relationships involved in this whole story that have never really come to light because nobody's actually investigated it. Al had talked about the Attorney General's office doing an investigation. The person who did the investigation was the Director of Consumer Protection. So I don't know how you would define conflict of interest, but for the Director of Consumer Protection to investigate the activities in this where his own agency is involved,
Right.
the banking department's involved, and just not find anything significant. The only reason we know a lot of the information that we know now that we'll get into is because of the efforts of Sue, but also the Chandler report, which was conducted by Charles Chandler, a retired attorney, at the request of Bill Gardner, the Secretary of State. Since the Attorney General's office had written this report trying to spread the blame over 3 different agencies, and the Securities Bureau falls under the Secretary of State's office, he decided to have his own independent investigation, which was the only one that took testimony under oath. And through his efforts, a lot of information came out that conveniently wasn't in the AG's report or their investigation. And so as a result of all this information that's come out, we've learned basically that FRM and CL&M were allowed to stay in business for years despite all of the violations of law, the show cause orders, all of these things. And when the Attorney General's office, when they were looked at under the microscope a little bit, we found that there were numerous criminal complaints that were made to the AG's office that were either ignored completely or referred to the banking department or the education department.
And when a criminal complaint comes in from a former assistant AG attorney into the Attorney General's office and it's ignored twice, you have to wonder what's going on.
I'm just trying, who oversees the Attorney General?
No one.
Maybe the governor.
No, he doesn't have any jurisdiction over him. He appoints him, but that's the end of it.
And so that seems to be a real flaw in our system, doesn't it? There appears to be heads of agencies which have no accountability, whether it's an Attorney General or a county prosecutor.
Or the banking department?
Or the banking department. There has to be some, isn't there an oversight committee in the House?
Not that I'm aware of.
Can I just follow up on that for a second,
Sure.
Kevin? The word that I use to describe the agencies in New Hampshire is silos, okay? They are not managed by anyone except the head of that agency. No one told Peter Hildreth what to do except Peter Hildreth. He reported to the governor, but the governor did not manage him.
And I'd like you to elaborate a little bit about the silo.
Of course. What I mean by silos, a silo is an institution that's standalone, okay, without any outside interference or management of itself. It manages itself, it finances itself, everything happens internal to itself. And the Banking Commission is a wonderful example of that, okay? Yes, they report in theory to the governor, but in fact, the governor doesn't really manage them on a daily basis or even a monthly basis. They just basically say, everything okay over there? And the banking commissioner says yes, and they go about their business. They self-fund. They do not take money from the general fund. They are not funded. They strictly, everything's internal. Fees and fines fund their agencies. They report to no one. The most influence the banking department has comes from lobbyists. And the lobbyists represent the industries that they license, and it's very tight knit. They know what they want. They negotiate it. but it's a silo. It's autonomous behavior. It's not managed behavior. There is no oversight.
And that's the key word, is the oversight. So these agencies can be running rogue for 10, 15 years without anybody noticing. Unless somebody's privy and has some moral ethics and say, look, hey, I don't like what's going on here. I'm going to get a 91A, right to know information, what's going on in here. Unless they do that, nope. The press, the governor, the House, the Senate, nobody's going to know what's going on.
Right. The FRM was allowed to exist because if you tried to find out if they had what the auditing experience was in the banking commission with FRM, you could not possibly have found out. These 70 violations of state and federal law that we alluded to a few minutes ago were the private purview and knowledge of the banking commission. If you called the banking commission, as some people did, and said, could you please tell me whether or not, what the track record is of this company? I don't want any investment advice. I only want to know, are they in good standing? Are they a company that's in good standing with the banking commission? No real problems? Just tell me yes or no. They would say, everything is fine. That wasn't the case. That wasn't the case, but that information was considered confidential by the Banking Commission, and they would not release it. 91A would not get it from them. Nothing got it from them. And so consequently, why did we get caught on this after having been successful for doing it for 25 years? Because we could not do due diligence with the banking department.
There was no facility, no way for you to do that.
It was impossible.
Well, not only that, but the Chandler report noted that no amount of due diligence would have uncovered anything negative about FRM. Not only the state agencies were the only people who knew anything negative about FRM, but they even misled the public and lied about it. Even though the term lie might be a harsh term, but when people called the banking department and asked, have there been any complaints against FRM? They were told, well, there was one minor complaint, but it was resolved to the customer's satisfaction. Well, the reality was there had been dozens of complaints about FRM. So if they had simply said, well, we're not going to tell you because that's private information, then people could have done more due diligence. But when people relied on that information, like the Better Business Bureau and other lenders,
Right.
it was really a victimization as a direct result of that misinformation.
And how did we get to the point with the Chandler? Was it because of Bill Gardner?
Yes.
He's the one that appointed Charles Chandler to do that.
But Bill Gardner,
investigation.
he's the Secretary of State.
Yes, he is.
And-
Securities reports to him. The Bureau of Securities Regulation reports to Bill Gardner. And he wanted that for his own reasons, and those reasons were that his division had been misrepresented by the Banking Commission and by the AG's office. And he said, this is not right. I want the truth on the table, and the only way I know how to get it is to have this independent counsel, and that's what he did.
Just to give him a plug,
Absolutely.
Bill Gardner, he's a wealth of information, and he's a purist.
Yes, he is.
When it comes to the history of New Hampshire,
Yes.
he's bipartisan, the whole 9 yards.
Yes.
He doesn't play to one side or the other. And he's been on many shows around the state, and I mean, he could just go on and
Yes.
on about the history of the state. And he loves his craft. He loves his job. He loves what he does. And it is very fortunate that we had him to at least do this. But I find that he won't go to certain areas unless he's invited. And if there's areas where there are discrepancies that report to him, it's important that people would go to him and say, look, could you come to this committee and testify? We had to do that in the House. He won't just go into a hearing unless he's invited. And that's important, and that's the people's job. Right? But again, you had no idea that all this stuff was going on when you were investing.
You couldn't have found out.
I just find this fascinating, but this is almost dumb luck that Bill Gardner went and did this for you folks.
Well,
right?
he was doing it for him as well. I mean, he wanted his name cleared. He wanted his Securities Bureau to say, look, these people have been accused of things they didn't do, and I don't want that to stand, so let's get to the truth.
See, part of the convenience of of spreading the blame across the three agencies was that banking and AG reported or were part of the administration under the governor, and Securities Bureau of Regulation was under the Secretary of State, Bill Gardner. So the administration couldn't be totally at fault if they brought securities in as well. And that
Bill
was part
said, hey,
of the.
wait a minute, we're not going to do this. This isn't going to happen.
Right, Mark Conley, at the time director of the Bureau of Securities, reporting to Bill Gardner, brought in the legal expert for securities law to testify in front of the Joint Commerce Committee. He's the same man that wrote the textbooks on the blue sky laws meaning the security law. And he testified that these were in no way a security. They were a mortgage, just like a bank gives a homeowner or someone else a mortgage. That's the function we were performing. We were bankers, not quote-unquote investors. I lost my train of thought, I'm sorry.
Well, let me just jump in real quick then. So basically, if Hilliard had not Hildreth had not spread the blame to the securities, we might not have found out till much, much later, if at all.
That's right. If he had taken ownership for the problem, securities never would have become involved, and this never would have been public. Okay, he caused his own downfall in trying to point the finger to somebody else. Mark said, no, Mark Conley, we're not to blame. And then they started a public battle between the two. Hilder saying, Conley, you're to blame, and Conley saying, no, I'm not to blame. These were all banking issues.
So how many people did this affect in New Hampshire, this FRM?
80 or 90.
80 or 90. And basically the loss.
But there were hundreds across the country as well.
Right.
So FRM was in other states as well.
Well, they were in New Hampshire, but they were taking and funding loans throughout the country.
Right, they were
Lenders-
also licensed in 13 other states.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh.
and there were lenders all over the country. There were borrowers all over the country. This cover-up, though, this finger-pointing, this cover-up, led to the AG's office placing FRM into federal bankruptcy. And this is where the real sad story comes in. Federal bankruptcy trustees do not work for the federal government. They are independent contractors. In our particular situation with FRM, the FRM bankruptcy trustee was allowed by the judge to hire his own law firm. The trustee then has a conflicted interest. Do I do what's best for the case, the bankruptcy case, or do I do what's best for my law firm?
Okay, can I just stop you right there? Who is the judge?
Judge Michael Deasy.
Thank you.
He's retired. He's still hanging on, though, to clean up the FRM case.
Okay. And what
The
was
bankruptcy trustee is Stephen Nottinger out of Nashua, and his law firm is Donchester Nottinger here in Nashua. The trustee has wide discretion on how to administer the case. In our opinion, he chose the avenue that would provide his firm the most revenue. Rather than saying anyone who was a net loser, meaning you lost more money than you put in, we would not touch. He, in turn, sued every single solitary lender for their mortgages.
Were you sued
Oh, yeah.
Everyone was
Everybody was.
individually.
by Donchas?
Yeah.
Yes.
We by the trustee. We
No,
would,
wait, you invest, and then you're going to get punished by being sued?
That's correct.
yes.
This is why the crux of the issue about whether these were securities or whether they were loans, whether we were investors or we were lenders, cuts to the heart of the issue.
Right.
Because Peter Hildreth said that these were securities, in order to point the blame away from him, it allowed the trustee to use the argument that, okay, we're all investors in FRM, therefore all of our mortgages are the property of FRM. And so at a private meeting, 2 weeks after the collapse of FRM, the Attorney General's office, the banking department, and the trustee had a meeting and all came to the conclusion that these were securities. Yet nobody from the Securities Bureau was even invited to the meeting. And so by declaring these were securities, they caused far more damage than Scott Farah and Don Dodge did, because that gave the trustee the legal basis to claim all of those properties as part of the estate. And by doing that, he tied us all up in court for years. And that's where people really lost their money. It wasn't from Scott Farah per se, but a lot of folks lost millions because of the trustee and the process that he used in order to liquidate this estate. Like Sue had mentioned, you know, he hired his own small law firm to liquidate the estate. Well, they get paid from the estate. They get over $300 an hour to work on this case each. The trustee himself gets 3% of the gross that they bring in. And so the way they decided to liquidate the estate, which by all intents and purposes was insolvent, there weren't any assets. The AG's office even testified the other day that the company was insolvent and there weren't many assets. And so by declaring all of our mortgages as part of the estate, it allowed the trustee to go after each person and sue us, not only for your loan and the property that was securing that loan, but any money you had ever gotten out of the company. If you had made a loan, for instance, for $100,000, and that loan had gotten paid back to you, and then you rolled that same money over into a new loan, and then the collapse happened, the trustee would sue you for the $100,000 loan and the property securing it, but he would also sue you for the other $100,000 as well as any interest you ever made on your loan. So now not only have people lost everything, now they're being sued for money they don't even have.
Oh, my gosh. So, and
And that was all as a result or a consequence to the Attorney General's office decision to place FRM into Chapter 7 bankruptcy.
instead of receivership.
11 days after they shut their doors.
They hired a Boston law firm that had a conflict with the Securities Bureau because the Securities Bureau had won a large case against one of their clients. And so the AG's office hires that firm, paid them $75,000 of taxpayer money, and they came to the conclusion also that these were securities and didn't look at a single document to reach that conclusion.
Kevin, let me just say to you what the Attorney General's office is saying to us. When I personally had a conversation with them in the hall, and I said, do you have any idea what your decision has done to the lenders of FRM? The bankruptcy trustee is plundering us now. He's suing us. And his answer to me was, that's an unintended consequence.
All right, right now, my head would be blown to smithereens. You seem to be holding it together, but I'm just hearing right now, and our government is not, nobody's being held responsible, and the lawyers are bankrolling
Right.
off of your hardship.
Nobody's been held accountable in this whole thing, and there are all sorts of different relationships that nobody has looked into. There's been no criminal investigation. There was an attorney.
Who would do a criminal investigation if there were to be one?
I think somebody would need to appoint an outside independent counsel to look into
Like
this.
the legislature?
That would be my guess.
Well, I asked
I don't know.
the U.S. federal attorney if he was going to investigate the FRM Ponzi scheme because it was the biggest fraud in New Hampshire's history. And he looked at me and he said, no way, it would take me 3 years. I'm not going to do that.
Okay, I'm still kind of, my emotions got a little into this. I'm still a little wrapped up with the fact that the lawyer had two options. He could have done one, which would have helped you folks, which was what? Turn it into receivership?
Yes.
Right.
Oh, that was the Attorney General's office
Okay.
that could have
Right.
given
Not
it to
the
banking
bankruptcy
for,
trustee, Attorney General, yes.
Okay,
for receivership, state
Right.
receivership, which would have been administered by the banking department.
but I'm thinking about the Donchis thing here.
Oh.
Right.
Yeah.
He had wide discretion how to pursue with the case.
And then the most optimum to help the people that were
would be to declare people net losers or net winners, okay, and leave the net losers alone. And after the net winners, okay, he should really have looked at the documents and said, these are mortgages. Everybody that has this is, I have nothing to do with that. I'm going to take the FRM estate, which consists of Scott Farrah's house, his cars, and I'm going to liquidate that. That's all there is to it for my job. But no, he didn't do that. He should have done that. He took a route down the road that was authorized him because of what Peter Hildreth did initially. The AG endorsed, the governor endorsed, the legislative committee endorsed Maggie Hassan, and suddenly we've got a whole bunch of people singing out the same songbook, except the federal judge, after 3 years later, he said this is not true.
Right, 3 years later, the federal judge said, no, these are mortgages, and the person whose name is on that mortgage owns it.
And the wide discretion was given by who?
The federal bankruptcy laws.
Absolutely.
See, the trustee didn't violate any laws that I'm aware of.
Right.
But it does give an appearance of impropriety for him to hire his own small law firm, which his wife was one of the partners as well, to liquidate the estate. Everywhere where discretion was available to him, he always chose the path that was more complicated, that would cost more money. And the settlements that were made were not fair. There was no across-the-board fairness because he would negotiate with people and try to get as much as he could out of people. A typical settlement starting negotiation would be, he would say, okay, we will auction off your properties on the auction block and then split 50% each, 50 going to you, 50 to the estate, of the net proceeds after property taxes, which had mounted because the properties were held up.
Right.
Even though the trustee claimed all these properties were part of the estate, he exercised no ownership responsibility, didn't pay any of the taxes, so therefore the penalties and fees and interest were mounting. Properties that were under construction sat vacant. He didn't collect rents from borrowers or anything like that. And so people saw their equity evaporating before their eyes. Their legal bills were mounting. There was one couple who took the trustee further than anybody to fight this, and they spent over $100,000 in legal fees. And ultimately, the trustee caved in and settled with them by releasing all of the loans that he was suing them for, because I believe he was afraid to go to trial and lose, because already he had lost most of his counts. He was suing us for various counts. One, he said the mortgages were securities. The judge ruled against him. He said all of these loans in the escrow account were commingled with CL&M and FRM funds. The judge ruled no, they weren't. And so at the end of the day, it was coming down to the last count or two, and the trustee didn't want a ruling, I think, from the judge, because I believe it would have come out against him, and it would have showed that he just fleeced hundreds of people out of millions of dollars and made himself a lot of money in the process.
Is there
with
any
no
way to
legal basis.
Is there any way to make him accountable this way?
I don't know.
I don't think
think
so,
so.
because
I don't think so.
he did follow the laws,
everything
but
he
the
did was-
laws are very, very.
Right, so we need to work on the laws then. Local.
That's federal laws.
Those are federal laws.
Well, he was able to go back 4 years because that's New Hampshire state law.
Right.
Federal law, you can only look backwards 2 years.
That means if he was going to try and get money out of you, any money that you had received from CL&M from interest payments on loans that you had made or loans that you got paid off from the borrowers, he would go after all of that money going back 4 years. So he took advantage of the New Hampshire laws when it was to his advantage, because the federal law only allowed him to go back
And who's looking out for the victims?
Nobody.
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 No one.
We asked if we could have a creditors committee. We asked the person who supposedly supervises the trustee, the U.S. assistant trustee, if we could have a creditors committee, and the answer was no.
But
Because it was Chapter 7 liquidation. We could not have a creditors committee. If we could have, we could have appointed or hired a lawyer who would have represented the creditors, and that lawyer's fees would have been also paid out of the estate.
and we were talking a little bit off camera. You were telling me that some people had to go back to work after 87 years. They've lost
Yeah,
everything.
and let me just speak to that. My wife and I have an email list that consists of about 150 people that are victims. And I will tell you very candidly that every human drama, every human tragedy you can think of, from suicide to divorce to Chapter 11 to just destitution, has taken place. There's one man who went to work in Afghanistan just to feed his family. He's voluntarily extricated himself from his family for 3 years just to pay the bills. People have lost everything, and no one has cared. The bankruptcy trustee, people think that he's doing this for the benefit of the creditors. That's what it says in the fine print. That's not true. He's in this for the benefit of himself. Okay, and there is no money left over for the creditors. You wait and see when this is all said and done. When they pass out the money at the end of the day, there's going to be less than 1 or 2 or 3 cents on the dollar is all you're going to get back. And most people won't get back anything because he took away their right to receive money at the end, or he had you sign a piece of paper saying that you won't participate in any distribution.
In exchange for dropping the lawsuit against a lender,
Right.
they had to forfeit their proof of claim to the estate.
And part of that agreement was you wouldn't sue the trustee.
Right. Let me say a couple more things.
One more thing.
Whoa.
One of the suicides that happened was a New Hampshire resident. The wife and the son came home from grocery shopping, opened the garage door, and saw the husband in the garage, dead. 6 months later, they hear Peter Hildreth say in the Joint Commerce Committee hearing, these people, the lenders, only had a slight change in lifestyle. Can you imagine how that poor widow and son felt after hearing him say?
Is he in jail?
No.
No, of course not. He
Collecting
retired
full
with full
retirement.
benefits. He lost nothing.
What's his retirement, do you know?
I have no idea.
I mean,
I
it's
do
got to
not
be
know.
public record.
Oh, sure it is.
Sure. He was making over 6 figures for his salary. He spent 6 months on paid administrative leave waiting to have his name cleared at his impeachment hearing. And when he went before the governor's council under charges of negligence and malfeasance, he lasted about 5 minutes under cross-examination before he called a timeout and then went to the
Retirement
retirement
board.
board and filed his retirement papers and was allowed to retire with full benefits. And I believe he made it to the next step up on his retirement because he was able to stay on the books for an extra 6 months when he was home
And the
receiving
governor,
his salary.
and the governor and council ended the removal hearing. They didn't
didn't wanna
continue
hear.
to find out what Peter Hildreth knew.
And Hildreth had publicly
Were you
said,
there at the hearing?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
All right, did anybody say anything, did he blurt out anything?
well, prior to that, he had publicly stated that he had damaging information on the governor. Whether that played into anything, who knows? But there are so many dots that haven't been connected because nobody's done any type of criminal investigation or shown any interest in really finding out about these
That's funny that you
relationships.
say that.
There was a relationship between Peter Hildreth and one of the top law firms in this state. He claimed,
is?
was it Gallagher and
Gallagher,
Cartrell.
Callahan, and Gartrell.
And he claimed to be, best friends with Chris Gallagher. And one of the attorneys who went to work at the banking department was told by the person he was replacing to handle any clients of that law firm, with special treatment.
And FRM was a
a client of that law firm,
Now, you're retired military?
right?
And was this part of your retirement to reinvest? Is that, I'm not going to ask you how much it was, but was this your retirement money that you used?
Yeah, I mean, it was a significant part of, my nest egg, what I had saved up for
And you
myself.
figured you just invest it, and then, of course, with your investment, you find not only are you investing, now there's a law firm that's trying to sue you for your investment.
Right. I showed my loan documents to several lawyers right after the collapse, and every one of them told me, oh, you have no problem. This is legitimate. Your loans are recorded in the counties respectively in your name. You should have no problem. Well, several weeks later, I had a problem because now I'm notified that I'm being sued not only for those loans, but also money that they wanted back.
Oh, let me just follow up on this thought, though. Now, were you sued by
Oh,
the
yeah.
Okay, and you had to hire an attorney.
Oh, yeah.
And how did that attorney do for you?
Well, he did a great job, but it cost me a lot of money, and it cost me a lot of money. What I did in terms of how I settled with the trustee is I offered to write him a check in order to be released from the lawsuit so I could get my 2 mortgages back. because I knew the properties would be worth more if you did some work on them, fixed them up, or did something to them instead of just sell them on the auction block. And so I had to do a signed financial affidavit proving to him that he was getting my last nickel in order to release me from the suit.
I got a really small brain, and I'm going to try to figure this out. When you wrote him that check, who kept that money?
It went into the estate,
And
which
who kept
pays him.
That's what I'm trying to get at. That's amazing. And that,
Picture a giant pot of money, which there wouldn't be anything in there if it weren't for this determination that we were all investors in FRM and that these were securities. So now you've got all of these lenders whose properties and loans are being tied up in this estate, and it's being liquidated supposedly for the benefit of the victims, for the creditors. So he's suing all the victims on behalf of the victims, and the people who are getting all the money are the people who are buying these properties on the auction block for pennies on the dollar, and then the money that comes into the estate, as long as there's enough in there to keep paying the trustee, he's got unlimited resources to take us to court and to sue us and drag things out.
Can I
Yeah.
go down just a different path for a second, Kevin, because I know you're running short on time. So where does that leave us, okay, with respect to our options moving forward? And by the way, why are we here? We're here for two reasons. Number one, we want to tell our story so that everyone in New Hampshire understands what happened, and to take an interest in this, because it could be them, not on this kind of a situation, but any business they do, anything they do that that involves a licensed entity in New Hampshire, you have this kind of exposure. If they're not enforcing their duties for this situation, how many other situations should they be concerned
a
about?
license does not guarantee the public is protected.
That's correct.
Right.
That's correct. Now, what can we do about it? Can we sue the state? No. Why? Because the state has no duty of care to an individual. They have a duty of care to everyone, but no one specifically. So what can we do? We have talked and looked at every opportunity to try to give some people some dignity back in their life. And we have finally got a bill that has been through the Senate approved, and it's now in the House in the Commerce Committee. And it's a bill for partial restitution, and not very much, but partial restitution, just to help people get back on their feet. Okay, and we shall see where it comes from. It is not taxpayer money at all.
It won't come
No
from the
tax-
general fund or
It
anything.
will not come from the general fund. There's no taxpayer money. It's fines that come from institutions that have violated the
Right.
law. Now, will it see the light of day? Time will tell. We believe it's fair. We believe it's the only option we have to hold New Hampshire government accountable. If we don't do that, if New Hampshire doesn't learn from this experience and do something to correct this, it may happen again. We do not want that to happen to anyone. The pain has been phenomenal.
Well, just from personal experience, sitting on the Redress of Grievance Committee, we've seen people like Mr. Jeff Frost, who was falsely accused. His house was ransacked. His attorney's files were ransacked. He ended up filing an appeal. They threatened him with 5 years of imprisonment with a $500,000 fine, or $800,000 and whatever. It was just some ungodly number. He says, listen, I'm innocent. He appeals to the Supreme Court, and he paid $180,000 plus to defend himself. In our committee, the Attorney General's office said, well, we misinterpreted the law. Basically, oops. So it's happening. It's happening on every different level of government. The family courts. Who are they accountable? The county prosecutors, the EMTs, your situation. We're finding in every level of our government, there's not accountability. And this is just local. And so we need to start legislating that our local governments have oversight, and it needs to be open to the people. I know this is just the tip of the iceberg, but we're going to have other guests on another show to talk a little bit more detail of their experience. Now you said, is it Mr. Conrad or
Conley.
Conley wrote a book.
He did. The name of the book is Cover Up, and you should ask him to be a guest on your show. He is a fine gentleman who has great integrity, and he knows the inner workings of the government, and he is someone that could bring great value to the community. And my last comment would be that if citizens don't get engaged and pay attention this will happen forever. It is only when you hold them accountable by watching what they do and questioning what they do, and that's the only way they do anything, is when they think they're being watched.
And it could be happening right now.
Absolutely.
And if it's happening right now, where's the accountability?
Right.
We've just got, there isn't any.
That's one of the main reasons why I'm here. I applaud you and your show for what you do, because I've seen corruption personally at the highest levels of federal government. And after this FRM situation, it really got personal. And so I've declared my own personal war on corruption, abuse of power, and ignorance. Not illiteracy, but ignorance of what really goes on in government, what really goes on in these bureaucracies. And so when people say, what can we do about it? Well, at the federal level, I don't think there's anything the average person can do, because those people are bulletproof, I think, by the time they get to Washington, D.C. But at the local level, this is the place to put a spotlight on people, to educate people about what's really going on, because what you see is politicians and bureaucrats in general, the worst thing that ever happens to them when they get their hand caught in the cookie jar is they resign in disgrace, crawl under a rock for a few years, wait till the dust settles, and then resurface and run for office again. And everybody forgets. Right. People forget by the next news cycle that this person lied to them or what have you.
There's a strong need for, on the federal level, for term limits. Mm-hmm. We're in trouble. But locally, it was Tip O'Neill, and I constantly quote him. All politics is local, and I think he borrowed that from somebody else. But he's right. Mm-hmm. And we have to get involved, and that's why we have Speak Up. And we're really glad that you came on the show. If there's information that we've left out, we'll gladly have you back. I would love to have you back.
Thank you for having us.
We'd be happy
Can
to
we
come
just
back.
close at one last point?
Sure.
The banking department has put in a claim to the FRM estate for $100,000 because of the work they did after the collapse, auditing FRM, as well as I think some penalties thrown in as well. The Department of Revenue for New Hampshire has put in a claim against the estate too for about $100,000. All of that money will come from the victims. So a little ironic that these same state agencies who allowed this to happen and were a very big contributor to the victimization of these people are now going to receive money from the victims again.
And also, if the AG's office put in a placeholder claim to the bankruptcy estate in case anybody won a potential lawsuit against the state, the claim would have been for the amount of the awarded damages. Because the AG's office said the rightful party to pay the damages is FRM. And as we all know now, it's the victims that are paying again.
That's right. Unreal. The state is taking money from the victims, literally.
Thank you again for coming on the show. We look forward to, if in the future, hopefully we can get some resolve to this. Let's start enforcing Article 31 and 32, where the people can petition their governments and receive directly from the House.
Yep.
These committees, we've got to do something. I'm sure you can't believe your ears, but this is going on in your government, and I really appreciate you watching Speak Up. There's stories and stories. We're getting inundated with all kinds of stories. But this is 4 years old, and because it's not sexy new news, it seems to be getting forgotten. And we want to resurface it because it needs to be resolved. It needs to be resolved for these people. It needs to be resolved for the people here in New Hampshire and across the country. And we want to help them. So until next week, that's it for now. Thank you for watching this episode of Speak Up. We also want to thank our sponsor, Center for Redress of Grievances, LLC. You can reach them at www.centerforredress.com. If you want more information about Speak Up or want to be a guest, you have something to say, contact us at speakupnh@gmail.com. And thanks for watching. Until next week. Every day, citizens around the country are faced with new dilemmas. Dilemmas that affect them profoundly. Whether it's injustice, discrimination, falling through the cracks, scandals and cronyism, balances of power, ethics, religious freedoms, state versus citizens, and unfunded mandates, and the list goes on and on and on.
Welcome to Speak Up. It's directed at those who have fallen through the cracks, and it gives them a voice. It's your turn to speak up. To stand up and fight back.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.